This is the presentation that the Maine Small Business Development Center is doing on how to hire extra help, especially hiring a contractor. And just to start off with a nice little fact is Maine beats the national average. So when we're talking about contractors, Maine is above the national average for having contractors in the workforce. Okay, so that's something to be proud of, but it also means we really want to make sure we're doing it correctly, because in my job with the Small Business Development Center, I've seen a lot of things and I've talked to a lot of businesses, and there are a lot of misconceptions out there. And that's one of the reasons, or the purpose of this presentation is, if you're looking to hire a contractor, what are some pros and cons that we're going to think of? What questions should we ask? Paperwork that we should do? And more importantly, how do we determine that contractor is properly classified? And we'll get to that in a second. But some logistics, this presentation, if you want copies of the slide, by all means, you can get copies of the slide just after this. We'll email anyone who registered for the to be here. We'll send you a copy of the presentation from slides, and we'll send you a link. The webinar is being recorded and will be available. And if you don't know, we do have a YouTube channel, the Maine Small Business Development Center. So all of our webinars go to live on there as well as on our website. But if you've missed it and you're hearing me right now not live, that's fine as well. YouTube is a great place to go and find the other videos that you might have missed. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk briefly who I am and why I do these kind of webinars. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of hiring a contractor. We're going to go through step by step the Maine Department of Labor's tests that they have of a contractor versus an employee, and kind of discuss that, and that's going to help you understand who might be a contractor and who might be better classified as an employee. We're also going to go through a little bit about how the IRS views it, because, you know, surprisingly or maybe not surprisingly, the Department of Labor and the IRS view contractors slightly differently. So you want to make sure that you understand that. Not a lot of people understand that. There's not just one test. We're going to look at the Department of Labor. We're going to look at the IRS. We're going to look at the paper trail, as I said. What documents do you want to have in place, or you should have in place, if you're going to be hiring a contractor? And then finally, we're going to just have a list of resources that are available, either websites or whatnot. So who am I? And who do I work for? So my name is Peter Harriman. I work for the Portland Center for the Maine Small Business Development Center. Typically, I am at 55 Exeter Street in Portland, but because of COVID, we've all been working remote these days. But if you do need advising, that is typically where I am. What does the SBDC do? Well, we provide no-cost business advising. And I say no cost rather than free, because nothing's really free in business, right? You're either going to give me your time or whatnot, and we are taxpayer funded. So get your money's worth, use us, right? We can help with business planning. We can help with startups. We can help with people who are already in business and looking for help, you know, hiring contractors, for instance. We can help with financial analysis. We can help with getting you to that next level for marketing and sales. So there's a lot of things we do. And just as a highlight of us keeping abreast of things, you know, we helped during COVID with the EIDL as far as explaining it, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, the Maine Economic Recovery Grant, the CDBG grant, the SVOG, the Shuttered Venues Operator Grant, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, the LMNOPs that the government, state or federal, like to throw out at businesses. We try to keep abreast of them at the Maine Small Business Development Center, and we either do webinars or we can talk to you about it individually if you're curious. So there's a lot of good information that we have, and we're located throughout the state. There's locations throughout the state. So wherever you're tuning in from now, more than likely there's a location within driving distance of you. And again, with COVID, a lot of us are now working remotely. So as long as you have a computer and an internet connection, you can also get an advising session with us. Now, for 2020 accomplishments, and I put a little star there, because we only count our accomplishments if we get something back from businesses. So if we drive by, we see you're open, but you didn't tell us that you're open, you didn't send us anything back, we're not going to count it. And I say this because confidentiality is #1 with us. We keep everything confidential by default. So the 2020 accomplishments we have are only based on the feedback we got. So 2,956 clients advised, and for 12 advisors, that's quite a bit of clients. 514 jobs created or saved, 38 million in capital generated, 93 businesses started, and many, many webinars, right? We do these every month. We do 4 or 5 webinars on different topics of business. So we're definitely trying to get information out there, and our whole purpose is to make you a better business owner so that you can run your business more efficiently, right? So our website is here, and the easiest thing to do to get a hold of us is to just click that request advising button right in that right-hand corner, that big orangish button for request advising. Otherwise, there are resources on our page. There's a newsletter that you can sign up for, and I promise we're not annoying. We only send them out periodically, usually monthly, to let you know about trainings like this that we have. So definitely the Small Business Development Center, if you're ever curious about starting a business, or if you're curious about topics like this of, hey, I just need a little more help understanding how to do this with my business. And that's what we're here for. What we cannot do is provide tax, legal, or accounting advice, right? So I have helped run small businesses. I've done my own taxes. I've done my own payroll even. So there's a lot of things I have done personally firsthand that I can talk to you about. But during our conversation, I'll usually say, you should really talk to a lawyer, or you should really talk to an accountant. And I'm saying that on purpose because what I'm telling you is informational, or should be used for informational purposes. And when you need to talk to a lawyer or an accountant, you should find those specialists and talk to them. So that's just a little disclaimer that we throw out there. On with the show. So why hire a contractor, right? So as I'm sitting here, the common reasons that I hear from people that come into my or talk to me on Zoom is, my business is doing really well and I like to expand, but I'm not quite ready for employees. Right? I just kind of want to do contractors at this point. Or I have a very short period of high intensity work, so I just have a busy season, but I just need someone to come in and help me, and then but I don't need them all year long. Or following that up, maybe I'm a business that's only open a portion of the year, and I'm not open the rest of the year, so I don't really want an employee year round. I just want a contractor for that portion that I'm open. Or some people are quite frank with me, they just don't want to deal with employees, right? The payroll or the employees, the training, or just the money that you have to pay for payroll. Or very few, but some say they want to test drive a potential employee and see how they work before they go ahead and hire them, right? So there's lots of good reasons for hiring a contractor, or that I hear about. But we, in this presentation, we just want to make sure you do it correctly, okay? So what are some of the benefits, right? So you're kind of like, okay, do I hire a contractor or not? What's the pros and cons? So the benefit of hiring a contractor, there's 2 primary benefits I always hear. One of them being, I like the flexibility, right? I hire the contractor for a job, and it's either a job or a specific time period, and then they're done, right? And I don't have to worry about them. I don't have to fire them necessarily. They're just there and then they're gone, right? So I have this flexibility. I can amp up my staff to 6 people and I can bring it back down when I need to, right? Especially if I'm a planner. So one of the 2 main reasons I hear about hiring a contractor is that flexibility for your staff. The second one is, with a contractor, you don't have to worry about some of the payroll responsibilities, right? And that's FICA, which is Medicare and Social Security. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about unemployment, and you don't have to worry about workers' comp because their contractor is not an employee. Those are all benefits that an employee gets, not a contractor. So those are the 2 primary reasons. I also hear, contractors just so straightforward for paperwork. And we'll get to that paperwork at the very end of what paperwork you should have in place. But basically they're 1099s, right? They get this is how much I paid you at the end of the year. Good luck. So the paperwork's pretty straightforward. In some instances, you can also use contractors to reduce your exposure to lawsuits, because you're literally putting a business, because the contractor is their own business, you're putting a business between you and the end client, right? And when you do that, there's kind of a little more insulation from lawsuits. I put a star there because there's been some pushback in some states as far as lawsuits that we're going to want to keep our eyes on, especially California. And usually California's leading the pack as far as worker rights and whatnot. So we do want to pay attention to that, because we have seen more lawsuits, and we've actually heard of them in Maine, where you as a hiring person of a contractor need to make sure that there are some safety measures, especially put in place of the workplace, where normally 20 years ago, it was the contractor's responsibility to make it safe. Now there's some responsibility for you to make it safe as well. So I put a little star next to that one so we can keep an eye on that. The other benefit to hiring a contractor is when you hire a contractor, you can get these exceptional skills and expertise that you don't have to train someone from the ground up. You get those skills and expertise at the pro level without having to hire them on as an employee, right? So you can get them just for when you need them, and then they're gone, right? So it's much more economical, and usually works out better for both parties to hire them as a contractor for a short period of time when you need them. So what I hear mostly is that contractors are seen as easier than employees by many businesses, right? Because there's a lot of things you don't have to worry about. However, there are some drawbacks to hiring a contractor. So we want to make sure when we're first initially deciding on if we want to hire a contractor or not, that we're also looking at the other side of the coin, not just the good stuff, right? So one of the drawbacks is they are not part of your staff. So there is this lack of company loyalty, right? When the job is done, it's not necessarily certain that they're going to continue on extending their contract, so to say. They could be gone. So you don't have that kind of solid feeling that you might get from an employee. As well, contractors, when you hire them, could promote their own brand and not necessarily yours, right? Because they have their own business and they might be looking for other jobs after your job. So you got to watch out for that. You also lose some control, and we'll talk a lot about this, right? We'll lose some control of work that's being done, right? And depending on how you set your contractors up, but contractors can refuse work. So they could cherry pick some of the good jobs and leave some of the bad jobs, depending on how you're using the contractor, right? And unless there is an agreement, anything the contractor comes up with, as far as, you know, a tool that they made to make the job easier, or some kind of work that could be copyright, that is the contractors. That is their business. It's not owned by your company. If your employee were to come up with a tool on the job that makes the job better, or you think is pretty innovative, that's your business, because your employee is your employee. But as a contractor, if you create something for your job that's quite innovative, you get the rights to that, not your employer. So keep that in mind. And your right to fire a contractor is dependent on the contract, right? So a lot of people overlook this, and this is a pretty important piece. Maine is an at-will employer. So basically in Maine, if you have an employee, whether it's right or wrong isn't the question. You can technically fire anyone as long as it's not one of those protected classes like race or religion, etc. You can simply say you're fired. Again, not saying right or wrong. As a contractor, you don't have that right to just say you're fired. You can say you need to stop work, but depending on how that contract was written would be how that then is unwound. So that's an important piece right there, that you do lose some of that control, again, depending on how that contract is written. The last part, which is kind of the star that we were going to get to later, is if a contractor is hurt on a job, there is a possibility now that they could sue you. So you do want to you do want to be aware of that. And when we're going through the documents that you're going to want to have in place, we'll address that a little more. Okay. Last, you could come under more scrutiny from federal or state regulators because the contractors are considered easy because you don't have as many tax or legal obligations to a contractor, or the contractor doesn't have employee rights. The federal and state regulators would rather see people be employees than contractors because they get more money from the unemployment, there's more workers' rights, less discrimination, hypothetically. So the federal and state regulators are really looking for something called misclassification of workers. And that's one of the primary reasons that we're doing this webinar, is to make sure we don't misclassify the worker, right? If they're a contractor, they're a contractor. If they're an employee, they're an employee, but we don't want to mix the two up. So what is the difference between a contractor and an employee, right? The first thing you need to know, in Maine, the default presumption is that a worker is an employee. That's the default. So it's kind of like you're presumed innocent before guilty. So the default is your employee. So you're going to need to prove that they are a contractor, right? Versus the other way around. So that's what you need to work off of from the very beginning, is the presumption is they're an employee. So how do I prove they're a contractor? So the Department of Labor for Maine, and there's a little web link there. Again, the slides will be available after this. But the Department of Labor has a 7-step guide, kind of answer this one, then go to the next one, that we're going to work through, that makes it relatively easy to determine, are these independent contractors or not? As I said, we're going to go through that. So let's go through one by one. So step one, which is the most important, as I've been saying, is the individual. When we say individual in these questions, we mean the contractor. So is the contractor free from direction or control of the employing unit? And this is all about control, control, control. How much control do you have over this person that you're employing, this contractor, right? One of the examples is a contractor makes their own schedule. So if you're looking to hire a contractor and you need that contractor to man a shift from 8 in the morning to 5 at night, that's one of the red flags, that you might have too much control over their schedule, right? Now, there are some exceptions to that, but that's one of the big flags, is how much control do you have, right? So are they free from direction or control of the employing unit? That's the first thing you gotta look at. How much control do I have over this person? Let's say you don't have the control of the direction or what they're doing, right? You're just hiring them to do a specific job. We go to step 2, right? Step 2, does the individual have the essential right to control the means and progress of the work, except as to final results? So I kind of feel like step 1 and step 2 should be the same, but what this is getting at is, hey, if I, for example, hire a contractor to build a deck for me, I have the final result of, I want a completed deck by June 1st. That's the final result. So that's what I have control over hiring the contractor. June 1st, I will have that deck done. The contractor then has their own right to control how they do that deck, when they do that deck, how the progress does. If they want to come the last day in May and crank that deck out and have it done by June 1st, then they can do it. If they want to do it slowly throughout the months leading up to June 1st, they can do that. The only thing I have control of is I know I'm going to get a deck June 1st and it's going to be complete. That's what I have. So that's what this question is getting at, is does the contractor have that control over how they're going to do that job, right? Do they schedule themselves on the work? Yes, they might have a deadline. We're not saying that you can't control as an employer. It's very important that you actually are very clear about the deadlines that you might have, but how do they get to that deadline? Are you telling them what to do and how to do it? If yes, the contractor maintains the control. You only have the final results that you're able to do. Then the next question is the individual customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, profession, or business? So what this is asking for, because there's another question that's getting people often confused, another step that's coming up. So what this is asking for is, when we look at this individual that you are hiring, are they operating like a business? So they are an independent contractor. Are they marketing? Are they creating invoices? Are they looking for other people to hire them? Are they keeping an accounting system, right? How are they treating this job? Are they treating it like they are in business? Or are they treating it more like an employee would, where they don't really worry about that stuff? So one of the things you want to look at is, are they in business? Are they independently established as their own business, right? If they are, we go to step 4. Does the individual have the opportunity for profit and loss? And that's the key there, and loss, right? Most people, whether they're employee or contractor, have the opportunity for profit, right? But the loss is the key. Is there a chance for a loss as a result of the services being performed for the individual or entity? So the example I like to use here is, if I'm an employee and I do something wrong, I'm still going to get paid to correct that mistake. I'm still on the clock. The employer is still paying me to correct that mistake, right? There's no loss. I'm still getting paid. If I'm a contractor and I do something wrong, or I misquote the price, there is a chance I'm going to have a loss, right? Because I did it wrong. I'll have to correct it contractually. Or I didn't price it out right, but I have this contract where I can't change the price. So there is that chance for a loss. That's a really big thing. If there's absolutely no chance that this person can lose money working for you as a contractor, not saying they will, hopefully they don't, but if there's absolutely no chance of them losing the money, then we got to look at that. So do they have the opportunity for profit and loss with your business? If yes, we go to step 5. Now, step 5 is a little weird, right? Because how it's worded, it makes it sound like you have to do something. So it says, does the individual hire and pay his or her assistants, if any, to the extent that these assistants are employees and they, the contractor, supervise the details of their work? So basically, I wish this was worded a little differently, but this is how the Maine Department of Labor has worded it. It doesn't mean that if you don't have assistants that you're not a contractor, right? It doesn't mean go out and hire assistants and then you be considered a contractor. It means, do you have the ability to hire assistants for your work, where those assistants would be your employees and not the employees of the person who hired you, right? That's what they're getting at, is, can you staff up your own? Are you a business that can staff up your own? So does the contractor have the ability to hire their own staff, and that staff is not the staff of the person that hired them, right? Because the contractor is going to be supervising those details. Again, not saying you have to go out and do it, just asking, is there that option available, right? If yes, we go to step 6. And as I said, this is a step that the previous step was kind of alluding to. Does the individual contractor make their services available to some clients or customer community, even if their right to do so is voluntarily not exercised or is temporarily restricted? So temporarily restricted means that maybe in your contract you say you can't work for the competition during our contract period, right? And a contract usually has a period or a job that they're doing. Voluntarily not exercised is a very interesting wording, because it could be a contractor is working for you, but not necessarily someone else. They could be exclusively working for you, and that's okay, right? What this question is trying to get at is, could they or do they make their services available outside? So basically, do they market? Do they work for another person? Have they worked for another person? If they could market and work for another person, excluding that you might have something in your contract saying they can't when they're working for you, then if that's yes, you go to the final step, step 7. And I'm going to apologize now because this is going to end up taking up the whole screen for step 7. So step 7, and this is the final step, folks, so bear with me. Step 7, you are going to, if all the rest were yeses, all the way up step 1 through 6, you get to step 7, you want to pick 3 of these, right? It doesn't have to be every one of them, because some contractors just aren't going to meet every one of them. So it's 3 of the following, right? 1, the individual has a substantial investment in the facilities, tools, instruments, and materials. So basically, using my deck example, I would not bring the tools for the contractor to build the deck. The contractor is going to bring their own tools, or they might have their own facilities or their own instruments, or they might have their own knowledge, their own licenses and registrations that they've done with the state, especially if it's a professional person that you're hiring. So that's the first one. Do they have their own tools, their own instruments, their own knowledge to complete the work? 2, is the individual is not required to work exclusively for the other individual or entity, right? So again, this is a little tricky. Some contracts might have, hey, we don't want you working for the competitor. I've seen that in some contracts while you're doing the work. So that might not necessarily fit, but ultimately, if you don't have that in your contract, this would fit, right? The individual is not required to work exclusively for the other individual entity. Remember, we're only looking for 3 of these, and these are kind of, you pick the 3 you want. The next, the individual is responsible for satisfactory completion of the work and may be held contractually responsible for failure to complete the work. So remember that profit and loss that we talked about? That's where this comes in. So if the contractor does not satisfactorily complete the work, are you able to point to the contractor and say, hey, this isn't up to the snuff, you're going to have to go back on your own dime and bring it up to the work that we agreed on, right? This one should be the slam dunk, right? The parties have a contract that defines a relationship and gives contractual rights in the event the contract is terminated by the other individual prior to completion of work. It's right in the name, folks. Contractor, you should have a contract. I don't know how many people I have met, businesses, small businesses, they've flown under the radar for years. If I ask them, so where's the contract for your contractor? They don't have one. Contractors, by definition, are working under contract. So if there's one thing I can get out, it's you should have a written contract that defines that relationship, right? Next one, payment to the individual is based on factors directly related to the work performed and not solely on the amount of time expended by the individual. And that not solely, right, is really the key there. So the contractor is being paid for the job, right? They're not submitting a timesheet necessarily. There are some contractors that work on a per hour basis, and that's okay. But what we're looking for is an employee punches the clock, a contractor might bill you for hours, but they're not necessarily punching a clock, right? They're billing you for hours to get to a directly performed, a lawyer might say, okay, I'm going to write a will for you, and it took this many hours to write the will. That's different than an employee saying, hey, I worked 40 hours this week and I happened to do a will during my time. So that's kind of the difference. So the other thing I like to point out over and over again is if you have a contractor, they should be submitting invoices to you to get paid, right? An employee has a timesheet, a contractor has an invoice. Such work is outside the usual course of business for which a service is performed. So this would be like if I'm a physical therapist, let's say, and I hire a cleaning company to come in and clean my office. Well, that's an easy check mark for one of the 3, right? Because the cleaning company is a completely different industry than physical therapy. So that's an easy one if you're hiring someone outside of your industry or outside of the work that you do. Now, some businesses will hire specialist in their field, and that's okay, right? Because we're only looking for 1 out of 3, right? I'm gonna move this bar here. The individual has an IRS determination, SS8, of independent contractor status. This one we'll get to in a second, because the IRS does have a way for an employer to file for independent contractor status of their employees. As I said, we'll get to that. We'll put a pin in that one. Because one of the things that we want to talk about first is that the IRS has a very similar but slightly different rules than the ones we just went through, right? So we just went through 1 through 7. And if at number 7, you had all the yeses for 1 through 6, and you did the 3 for number 7, then by the Maine Department of Labor, you're good to go, right? With the IRS, the general rule is that an individual is an independent contractor if the payer has a right to control or direct only the results of the work and not what will be done and how it will be done. So the IRS keeps it much more broad, right? And they have 3 factors they're looking at it. But as we're going through these 3 factors, this is one of the things that's curious about the IRS is they have this word that they love, okay? Reasonable. Is it reasonable to assume this person is a contractor? Is it reasonable to assume that this person should be an employee? Reasonable, reasonable, reasonable is the word that the IRS loves, because that's what they're trying to determine. If I'm reasonably looking at this, what would I determine? So it's not like the Department of Labor where there's kind of hard, fast questions you can answer yes or no. They're looking at a more nebulous, what would a reasonable person take from this relationship, right? And again, there's 3 factors that they're going to look for. One is the behavior, right? And again, control, control, control. What kind of control do you, the employer, have over this contractor that you are hiring, right? Do you have the control over how they're doing their work, when they're doing their work, what work's being performed when, right? So first thing to look at is what's the behavioral relationship between these 2, right? The next is what's that financial relationship? Who's supplying the tools? How are they getting paid? You know, are they submitting invoices? Can they work for others, right? So they're going to look at the financial piece of it. And lastly, they're going to look at what is there in writing that's going to give us some kind of relational that defines that relationship. Right? Is there a written contract, or are there benefits that are being incurred through this relationship, written or unwritten? Because remember, they're looking at reasonable. Is it reasonable to assume this person would be treated this way as a contractor, right? So the IRS, at the end of this, we have a page with a link to the IRS where they go through a whole series of PDFs on how they're looking at behavioral, financial, and relational differences for the contractor, but that's basically what they're getting down to. And so that's the interesting thing that I do want to point out to people is the Department of Labor could tell you, yes, you've fit the contractor criteria, but the IRS could say, oh, no, you don't. So you want to make sure you're on par with both, right? The IRS and Department of Labor. And again, it comes down to look at it reasonably, look at the control that you're having, and at the end of this, we're going to have all the documents that you want to put in place at a minimum, right? You could do more, but there's a minimum set of documents that you're going to want to have in place. Now, as I said, we put a pin in it, so we're going to talk about it. So the IRS does allow you to fill out something called the SS8 form that gives you the determination of what a contractor would be, if they're a contractor or an employee. Why I put a pin in this is because the last time I checked, and the IRS is working on it, but that form takes 6 months to get back to you. So that is a pretty long time to wait for that to come back. And typically, I see this form used when the Department of Labor is auditing, and the person, the employer needs more in their workshop to kind of help them through the audit. And so at that point, they'll send out the SS8 to help them with the audit versus a preemptive measure, because we kind of want to get some stuff done preemptively before we get into an audit, so that if that comes up, we can kind of give any regulator what they might be looking for. So there's another form that we're going to get to in another screen that isn't the SS8, it isn't from the IRS, but it is a close second. Okay, before we get to that, misclassification, right? So what are the common examples of how a business gets caught through misclassification, right? What could go wrong? I often see like a contractor will get hurt on the job and they're going to file for workers' comp because they don't understand quite right that they're not a contractor. Well, workers' comp is going to be very interested why there's no account for that person. Or the contractor could just sue you directly for any kind of injury that you got. Or the contractor, their work ends and then they file for unemployment and they list you as one of their employers. Well, unemployment, again, is a benefit of an employee, not of a contractor. So I see contractors that think they're going to get unemployment if they don't have work. Not true. The contractors feel they earned overtime wages and they file a complaint, right? Because they feel like they are deserved more money, basically, than what they were paid. And lastly, the contractor feels that you're somehow discriminating or not recognizing rights that they might have, right? These are common ways where I see business get in trouble because they didn't properly explain or go through the process of understanding who is a contractor, who is an employee, and how do I make sure that when I hire a contractor, they understand they are a contractor and not an employee. Because who do they talk to? Any of these things, they're going to be talking to the Department of Labor, they're going to talk to the National Wage and Labor Division, they might even talk to the IRS. And all of these different agencies are starting to have memorandums of understanding where, because of technology, they're starting to share all their files and all their information. So as much as we thought computers would help us, this is the point where files and keeping more computer files on a client or a contractor or an employee is the better, right? The more paper trail that you create, the better it is for you. So the Maine Center for Economic Policy actually looked at misclassification of employer, and they found all these different things, risk to unsafe work conditions, or loss of wages because people should have been paid more, right? They were undercut and just paid as contractors versus employees. And discrimination. So this is why this is a hot button topic, or this is going to be a hot button topic in the near future, is because of the revenue loss in that discrimination and or unsafe work conditions that were definitely exposed during the COVID pandemic. So that's one of the reasons that we're really honing in on this of, hey, let's get your ducks in a row of how do we properly classify a contractor versus an employee, what makes the difference and what kind of paperwork, right? Because this is where we're going to get into the paperwork, right? So after all this, after all the pros and cons, after looking at how that contractor performs their work and determining that they are a contractor and not an employee, what are the forms that we want to have in place before the contractor starts? Okay, that's the big key. Before they start, just like not like an employee, but just like an employee, we want to have a file on each contractor, right? And so some of the common forms that we see is number one, as I said, a contract, okay? Get a lawyer to review it. This is a good time to get a lawyer to review that contract. But each contractor should have a written contract either by job or by time period that is very clearly defined in the contract. Some elements, like one element is in the contract, it clearly says, I understand I am not an employee, right? And they're signing this contract. Clearly defines what they're responsible for. It clearly defines what happens if there's a late or unsatisfactory work. Clearly it says, how can we end the relationship on either side? How does the contractor end the relationship and how does the employer and the relationship. Clearly defines how the contractor is going to get paid and when the contractor will get paid, right? Might even define the need for the contractor to give invoices. But whatever you do, because I see a lot of businesses that go to the internet and they pull something off the internet, some kind of contract template, right? And yes, the internet is great. It's got a lot of information, but even if you pull it off the internet, you still might want a lawyer to review it, because you could have pulled something off the internet from Kansas, and maybe Kansas has a different law than Maine, and you've pulled a contract that isn't legal in Maine. So get a contract for every contractor, get a lawyer to review it. The W-9. So before you have a contractor start, you really should have them fill out what's called a W-9. The IRS has this available for download for free. The IRS almost never will get in the way of you in paying taxes, right? So the W-9 is an internal form, but the IRS has it for download for free. And in it, you're trying to get the contractor's name and their address and their tax ID so that you can send a 1099 to them at the end of the year, right? Now, for their tax ID, I always encourage my clients to try to use an EIN, an employer identification number, versus a social security number when you're hiring on contractors, right? The IRS will allow any sole proprietor to get an EIN, an employer identification number, for free, right? So the excuse isn't that you have to pay for it. And it's a very quick process. It's practically overnight. So as I said, when people are filling out W-9s and they're a contractor, I always advise my clients, if you can, whenever you can, encourage them to get, or even say, you can't say you require it, but you can say, we really need an EIN here versus a social security number. Because that kind of puts that extra layer of, okay, this person understands they are a business and not an employee, because they're using a tax ID for a business, not a tax ID for a person. Copies of the business insurance carried by the contractor, right? So especially in professional industries like lawyers or the medical field, you're going to want insurance, what do you call it? The professional liability insurance or malpractice insurance, any kind of insurance or general liability insurance. You're going to want to keep a copy of the insurance that the contractor has for their business. Again, it's another thing saying these people understand they're a contractor, they understand their responsibilities. Here's the insurance that they have for their business. This is that form that I said was a close second to the IRS form that you could do, the SS8. So the Maine Workers' Comp Board has a form called the WBC 266. It's a predetermination letter that you can get before the contractor starts. And it's relatively fast. It's not 6 months like the IRS form, but you can download this form and have your contractor complete it. So the IRS form, the employer is filling it out to get the determination. In this one, the contractor is going to fill it out. And the Workers' Comp Board is going to send them back a single page letter that says, based on your responses and responses to the questions, just like what the Department of Labor had for questions, based on your responses to that form that you filled out, we have predetermined that this relationship is a contractor relationship, right? So you can have them fill it out. It's good for a year. And then after a year, you'd have to have them redo it. But you can have them fill that out, that predetermination, get that letter, and give you a copy of that letter for your file. So you have a predetermination that they are a contractor, that the relationship there is one of a contractor. Copies of any current licenses, registrations, or permits. And this is where we get into workplace safety, right? We want to make sure they are up to date on any OSHA requirements, that they have their permits so they're able to legally do their jobs, that their licenses are up to date. And basically it's all about safety and making sure that they're qualified, right? We want to make sure we have copies, that everything is up to date. And go the extra mile these days, right? Because as I said, those lawsuits are popping up. So especially if you're in the trades and you're hiring a contractor, go the extra mile of possibly even having a form where it says, you know, I am aware as a contractor, or put it in the contract, better yet, saying I'm aware as a contractor that I need to follow the OSHA rules, and that that my employer could do a site inspection to make sure I am following the OSHA rules. Again, workplace safety has become really paramount with any kind of lawsuit that you might face for a contractor getting hurt. Understanding how the contractor will invoice for services, right? If the contractor doesn't have their own invoice, so it's someone who says, I don't have an invoice, you can give them a model to go by and say, well, you could invoice like this. But it is up to the contractor, ideally, to create their own invoice that they're going to give you to submit for payment, right? And that's something that you talk about before signing the contract, is how do you want to get paid? When do you want to get paid? And how do I know what you've done? What are you going to submit to me, right? So each contractor should be submitting an invoice to get paid. It shouldn't be a, you know, I know it happens in the real world. Well, I can see you did it, so here's your money, we're good. But you really should have an invoice that's created. Now, less common forms that I see is a confidentiality agreement. You know, you're either dealing with HIPAA or you're dealing with some kind of proprietary information. So you can certainly throw confidentiality agreements in there. Qualifications or resumes. You know, one of the questions that has come up when people are looking at contractor versus employee is, why did you hire this particular person? You know, what if their resume shows they had no experience whatsoever? That might be a little bit of a red flag, because you might have had to train them on the job. Whereas a contractor is typically a professional that is all up to snuff, right? You're not paying for their training, they're already trained. So sometimes it's good to get the qualifications or resume into the file if you ever think you're going to get audited. And again, that IRS form SS8, you can always do that. Again, the downfall with that is at this point being 2022, that can take up to 6 months to get back from the IRS. They are working on it. They're hiring more people. I expect that timeline to go down drastically, but at this point, it is a little bit of a long timeline. So that was kind of a, put that up again just so we can see it. These are the minimum forms that you want. They're not all the forms, right? You might, depending on your industry, you might have different forms that you also want to include. But for most contractors, these are the forms that you want. And this is before the contractor starts, right? So there is this process, this intake of paperwork that you're going to be doing. As I said, not like an employee, but like an employee. You're trying to intake and get this proper paper trail going for your protection as the employer, saying, hey, we did this whole process of onboarding this person as a contractor, and these are the steps we went through. We signed a contract. We had them fill out a W-9, ideally with the EIN. We have the insurance of this business. We have that predetermination letter saying this is a contractor relationship. We have their licenses and registrations or permits. We have an idea of what the invoices are going to look like, or that we are going to be invoiced, right? And any other forms that might be there. So we're really just saying, okay, we're setting the stage, saying this is a contractor. And that's what this whole webinar was about, is trying to get you to understand what the pros and cons were, right? Determine if you need to hire that additional help. Determine how you classify the employee versus the contractor, and what the Department of Labor is going to be looking for as far as questions they might ask you. So as you're going through those questions, it'll become apparent if you get to a question where you say, well, no, they by all means don't have that ability to do whatever that question is, right? We're going to collect the proper documents. The time period is 10 years. Oops, 10 years that you want to keep it, right? For any payroll, any business stuff, that's the default, right? Some people might tell you a little later, some people, or a little earlier rather, some might say 3 years, some might say 7 years. I always advise my clients 10 years, right? Why even mess with it? Just save it for 10 years. Digital files are great. And when in doubt, whenever you're in doubt, get help, right? Don't feel bad about reaching out to the SBDC, get that advising. Don't feel bad about reaching out to a lawyer or even anyone on human resources consultants can also help you. So definitely get help if you need it. So thank you for coming. I know that we had a few questions pop up in chat. I'm going to get to those in a second. With me sharing the screen, I don't know if these questions are going to come up, but I do have those resources here from the IRS. The IRS has a whole section on independent contractors and how they are defined. The Maine Department of Labor has standards on employment and standards on misclassification. And lastly, that last one is that Maine Workers' Comp Board, where you would find that predetermination letter to kind of make sure that you are classifying that relationship as a contractor, right? Let's go. Are you allowed to ban your independent contractor from working for a competitor? You can during the contract period say, put in a stipulation. You should, if I were a contractor, I'd demand more money, certainly. But you can during the contract period say, hey, I want you working for me during this contract period and not my competitor. So is it banned? No. So you can put that in there. Again, if I were the contractor, I would demand more money for that, or I would take it out, right? And then another one is step 7 redundant? It basically says it is okay to not abide by some of the other steps like step 4, as long as you have 3 of the following requirements. Well, remember, to get to step 7, redundant or not, to get to step 7, you had to answer the previous steps yes first. So as redundant or conflicting as they might seem, which I do understand sometimes they seem very close to each other, you have to get through those first 6 steps before you get to step 7. So if you get to a point where step 7 seems to be conflicting with the previous, it's kind of like, well, go back to the previous if you answered yes on that. And that's why step 7, you only answer 3, or you only have to check off 3 of, I forget how many, there's 5 or 6 requirements there. So you don't have to answer all of, or you don't have to check all of the requirements, just 3 of them, right? I'm gonna stop share for a second. Again, you will be able to get the slides with those links after. I have another, just a thank you. No problem. One of the things, as I'm waiting for more questions to pop up, one of the things I've been seeing more and more often is if you have an employee and a contractor, then workers' comp will more than likely audit you and want that proof that that contractor is a contractor. Otherwise, they're going to want you to cover that contractor under workers' comp as well, right? It only happens if you have an employee and a contractor, because otherwise, if you have just employees, no problem. If you have just contractors, you never deal with workers' comp. So if you have both of those, employees and contractors, then again, the last 2 years or so, I've really seen MEMIC and other workers' comp insurance companies really hammer down on, hey, we have this worker listed as a, because they do an audit. They say, hey, we have this person listed. What proof do you have that they are a contractor? And a lot of the times they're looking for that main letter of determination, that predetermination letter, to be on file before you have that worker start working. Remember, that only lasts a year, so you do have to renew that if you have a contractor that is someone who works, multiple years with you. Okay, we got a question here. What if you need temporary yet immediate help from adult niece or nephew for pay? Should I add them to payroll? What if it is a one-time or one-day thing once in a great while versus 1 week or more frequently? This is more complex than you would think, because when it comes to family members, there are some special rules. Now, niece or nephew might be outside of the direct family members, so the special rules might not apply. But definitely there are some special rules when it comes to family, as far as what you can do for hiring family, that are less restrictive than an employee or a contractor. So you would want to check into those first. But again, it's going to come down to what control do you have. It also, interestingly enough, comes down to what type of business you are as well. So without getting too far down the rabbit hole, but it's harder for you to hire a family member as a contractor if you're structured as a corporation than if you were a sole proprietor, for instance. Again, there's a big rabbit hole when it comes to family that we can certainly get into at another one that I don't want to go too far down yet. So first off, that family relationship, and then second off, how much control do you have? Now, in reality, do I see this happen all the time? And is it something where you give them a $100 bill and you say, go for it? You know, yes, I've seen that. How much money does a contractor need to get paid to submit a 1099? So according to the IRS, if any contractor is paid $600 or more, they should be issued a 1099. Now, the other thing is the 1099, there's little letters after it. Most of the time it's a 1099 NEC, right? We're used to the 1099 miscellaneous or income. It used to be just a 1099 miscellaneous, but now there is a 1099 NEC. And there's a 1099 miscellaneous still, but the miscellaneous is more for gambling, winnings, or your medical professionals, or very select people will fall into that. So $600 or more, you should be issuing a 1099. 1099s are due, if I remember correctly, they're due to the person by January 31st so that they can do their taxes. So if you are a business and you have not issued 1099s, and you should have, then you're probably going to want to get on top of that. You might have some penalties there for filing those late. 1099s, by the way, is another way that it acts as your receipt as a business. So if you have a 1099 on file for a painter that came in and painted your offices or whatnot, then that's your receipt, as well as their invoice as well as a receipt. But that's kind of like your backup receipt, saying, hey, this is an expense. This is a valid expense I had for my business, and this is some of the paperwork I have for that. Right? Hopefully that answered that 1099 question. There are, for filing a 1099, you don't, again, whatever you're comfortable with, definitely talk to accountants or whatnot, but there are a lot of online services where if it's just a matter of your business needing to file a 1099, and it's only like one 1099 or 5 1099s, not a lot of 1099s that you're filing, there are businesses online that you can hire just to file a 1099, and it's really not that expensive. Again, you want to make sure you have the right information from the W-9 that you got from the worker when they first started working, so you know where to send the 1099 and what tax ID to associate that 1099 with. All right, any other questions that we had?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody has them, feel free to plug them in there. And I will say that we are planning on doing a 1099 webinar in May or June that would dive into the recent changes or upcoming changes, and would probably dive a little deeper into those details. So keep an eye out for that.
Now, contractors are a great way to increase your business, right? To increase the productivity or to get your business to the next level. So this whole webinar was how to make sure you're classifying them right, how to make sure you structure their relationship correctly, and what documents you want to put in place, right? Because you could inadvertently hire someone and they should be an employee when, with a little pre-thought to the job and how you structured it, you could have put them into a contractor status if that works out better for you, right? As I said, contractors are in charge of their own taxes, the Social Security and Medicare. So typically a contractor is paid more than an employee, right? So keep that in mind when you're hiring them. You would not offer a contractor the same rate as you would an employee. An employee tends to be on average 15% more expensive for the Social Security and Medicare, for the workers' comp, and for the unemployment that you end up paying on top of your regular payroll. But hopefully this webinar has taught you how to tell the difference, the tests to kind of go through, the resources to find out more information, because we certainly can't cover it in an hour, and the minimum documents that you want to have in place before that contractor starts, so that you have a good file set to protect yourself, basically. I'll stay on for just
thank yous.
Yeah, I'll stay on for a little bit longer in case there's a question. And I will say, a lot of people that come on, it's because they looked online and they got so many conflicting information answers out there that's where the SBDC really shines, is you can actually talk to a live person. And if we don't know it, we're going to say, well, I'm not quite sure. We might need to follow up with a lawyer, might need to follow up with an accountant, or, I'll have to get that information for you. But at least you kind of cut through all the chatter that you see, because there are rules. There are rules for different states, and it gets confusing when you're looking on the internet of how old the information is or what the information pertains to. So why not get right to it? And we're no additional costs, right? You've already paid taxes, so use us. I will say we are very busy, so don't think we're not being used.
Yep. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. If you, like Peter said, if you're not set up with a business advisor already, we highly recommend it. I will be sending out a follow-up email this afternoon that will include a link to the recording of today's session and the slides. So all of those links you'll be able to click through. And all of our contact information will be in that email as well. So there'll be a link just to click to set up advising, and we will go from there.
Thank you all.
Have a great day, everyone.